Okay, hello everybody and welcome to the latest Urban Living webinar. And today we will be discussing the future of youth travel. Today's session is one of a series of Urban Living webinars, which we're hosting in the run-up to a new event called the Urban Living Festival, which is taking place in London on July the 7th and the 8th. And this event focuses on the convergence of various hospitality and real estate asset classes. It's going to be a fantastic event. It's a great location. We've got a really good agenda, and we're really excited to be one of the first face-to-face events. It's been a while, so we hope to see loads of you there. For more details of that event, you can look in your Zoom chat. On today's session, if you are not one of our panelists, if you could keep yourself muted, that would be great. We're going to have about a 45-minute discussion with our panel, and then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions, please submit them via the chat function in Zoom. Everybody who has registered for the session will receive a recording via email in the next couple of days. My name's George Sell. I'm Editor-in-Chief at International Hospitality Media. I've been a property and travel journalist for around 20 years now. Actually, that slide's a touch out of date. IHM is a publisher of online news for the hospitality sector and an event organizer. So before I introduce you to our panelists, just wanted to give the session a bit of context, just some facts and figures that I've seen while doing a bit of research for this session. So according to the WISE Travel Confederation, before the pandemic, around 45 million backpacking trips were taken each year pre-pandemic, with the average money spent around $4,000 US. Obviously, youth travel isn't just confined to backpacking, but I just want to talk about that sector for a second, because there are some quite conflicting views on them. Some people are in favour, they think they enrich an environment. Others think they contribute to over-tourism. And if anybody saw the New Zealand Tourism Minister Stuart Nash's recent comments, when he was announcing that he wanted the country to concentrate more on high net worth individuals rather than youth travellers, he used some quite earthy language, which you can see on the quote there. And he didn't think that backpackers and youth travellers resonated with the country's brand, which ruffled a few feathers. And got a response from Jenny Powell there, much more in favour of youth travel. Powell also predicted that budget travel and youth travel will be among the first sectors to recover once international travel resumes, as millennial travellers are crisis resilient, and that's something we'll come on to and talk about shortly. Closer to home, the Youth Hostel Association here was 75% down on turnover for 2020, losses of around 30 million. Cash Bhattacharya from Budget Traveller says COVID is decimating the industry. It's putting a lot of hostels out of business, particularly the smaller independent ones, which in many ways represent the soul of the industry, he says. Linda Martinez from the Beehive says the benefit of staying in a hostel is you get to socialise, feel like you're part of a local community. Obviously, that is not possible at the moment. So she says, now when we have guests, we're required to keep people spaced apart by law. We can't do things that we would normally do, like big dinners and cooking classes. And this whole communal element that's a big part of youth travel is not possible right now. There's also a school of thought that the way people travel may change after the pandemic, and they might, well, some people have described it as the slow travel movement. Will Hatton says, it's my hope that folks will not take travel for granted anymore, that they take the time to take a deep breath and truly soak in their surroundings, rather than viewing everything through their phones and doing it for the gram. I think that COVID gives the world the chance to slow down a bit, reset, and hopefully we'll come back stronger and wiser. And just to touch quickly on the investment piece, The hostel market particularly is very fragmented, but it has seen a few big institutional deals. There was the generator sale a while back. And Juan Bago from Christie & Co says the hostel market is such a new product, so opaque, but there are some players in the market that stand out. And he goes on to say, investors are interested in hostels as an opportunity because of the opportunity for profits on the asset. You have more beds and you have the chance to be creative. There's the capacity to maximize the space. That's why it has such a lot of potential. So we'll move on and talk about investment later in the chat as well. So this webinar series is sponsored by Res Harmonics, who are partners for the whole Urban Living series. And we're just going to show you a very quick video about what they do, and thanks very much to them.
Res Harmonics is 100% dedicated to serviced apartments and co-living, bringing together all the tools you need to drive performance and deliver a great guest experience. From channel management and direct bookings to finance, housekeeping, maintenance and customer journey automation, whether centrally or on the move, the platform consolidates all information into one system, saving you time, improving communication and maximising business performance.
If you'd like to find out more about Res Harmonics, you can see LinkedIn contact details for Steve from Res Harmonics in the chat, as well as a link to their website. So now it's time to introduce you to our panelists. We've got a great bunch here, and I'm going to ask them all to introduce themselves quickly. We'll go from left to right on the slide there. So Vicki, if you'd like to start, please.
Hi there, thanks George. Yeah, my name is Vicki Cunningham. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for BUNAC. BUNAC's a global work and travel company that's been around for about 6 decades. I've lived through the acquisition of BUNAC by STA Travel in 2012, and more recently sought new investment when STA Travel devastatingly went into insolvency. Prior to my time at BUNAC, I worked in graduate recruitment events, so I've got a almost 20-year career working with the youth sector and following the Gen Zs, the Millennials, Gen X, all the way through.
Thanks, Vicki. Steve, would you like to go next?
Sure. I'm Steve Lowy. I'm CEO of Anglo Educational Services and the Residence Apartments. Anglo was founded in 1972, before I was born, and has been looking after mainly American university students in London in housing. So we have over 200 apartments for students. We provide internships, we do educational tours, we even do classes. Obviously, we've had to pivot a bit, and we'll talk about that later in terms of virtual programming. The residence is corporate housing. We have 61 apartments in 4 locations across central London, and we work with a lot of tech brands to house their staff when they come to London. Performed pretty well actually through the last 12 months. My background is hospitality. I've backpacked twice, once around the world, which was a lot of fun. I've run a backpackers hostel in central London, so a bit of experience there, and also created my own budget hotel chain with a youth element, and worked with STA and BUNAC actually back in the day, both to host interns but also general youth travellers. I'm also chairman of BETA, which is the British Educational Travel Association.
Great, thank you, Steve. Dan.
Yeah, thanks guys, and good afternoon, nice to be here. So for me, my name is Dan Baker. I'm the general manager for the EMEA markets for student.com. We're a VC-backed student accommodation marketplace. We booked around 40,000 students this year, which in a pandemic year we're quite pleased with, but hopefully next year will be a hell of a lot more. My background's also obviously in youth travel, hence why we're here. But so I launched a company called Student Universe into the UK back in 2013. We went through the sale and acquisition of that to the Flight Centre Travel Group. I then worked within the Flight Centre Travel Group, looking after digital in Europe for 18 months before coming back to the student space with student.com, where I've been now for nearly 3 years. Yeah, that's me.
Thanks, Dan. And finally, Sem.
Hi, my name is Sem Schuurkes. I'm a co-founder of CityHub, which is a hostel hotel hybrid. We've developed our own sleeping unit, which we call a hub, which is actually without the bathroom. So all the other facilities in the hotel are shared, but very luxury. We opened our first location 5 years ago, and now we're on a third location, which I'm at today in Copenhagen. And yeah, we're trying to roll out the brand more across Europe.
Great, thank you. The LinkedIn profiles for all our panelists are in the chat, so if you'd like to make contact with them and carry on the conversation after the session, then please do so. So let's kick off by some general chat about how the pandemic has affected youth travel and your businesses specifically. You know, it's been pretty devastating across all forms of travel and hospitality, but we do hear a lot about how younger travellers are more resilient, less risk averse, and really want to get on with it. So Sem, maybe you'd like to start and talk about how your business has fared and how you see things, you know, how you see things coming back in the next year or so.
Yeah, I think, well, it's been a big drama pretty much since day one. But we try to fill it up. Now we're renting out rooms also for longer periods. So we've managed to fill it up a little bit with that. But we definitely noticed in August when there was a little bit of, they stopped with some of the measurements, and then immediately we noticed the hotel filling up already. So we definitely noticed that everybody's like ready. I think young people, they don't worry too much about the virus. It's because it's not directly influencing them. So yeah, I'm really expecting as soon as some of the rules will go away that yeah, travel will just pick up pretty much for young people.
Vicki, does that tally with your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I think whilst there's, you know, obviously when borders are closed and there aren't flights connecting different countries, travel doesn't take place. But every time there's been a window for travel, our demographic are the first on the plane, basically. So the demand is there. They're ready to travel as soon as it's safe and they're able to, really. And I would say potentially even more so than before, just because of other plans that they may have had have been interrupted, whether that's postgraduate study or a job that didn't pan out, unfortunately, in this time. So yeah, absolutely, they're ready and waiting.
Yeah. And how has this affected the mobility of students? Dan, do you want to take that one first?
Yeah, sure. I think you know, for us, we saw probably about 25% of international students actually arrive in the UK in September, which, you know, by some standards, as a business, we feel quite lucky that we had that many come. Obviously, it led to huge cancellation rates, huge changes of occupancy, and, you know, everyone's still kind of feeling that out. But you know, with universities closed, people left pretty quickly as well. So it's been slow to come back kind of this time around. But again, I can only echo the sentiments of the guys that we know that people will come back as soon as possible. The demand for the summer is there already. We're seeing inquiries come through. Our February is 60–70% up on January, which shows the confidence in the UK is coming back as well. So we feel good about it. We're just waiting for this big announcement on the 22nd of Feb, and everything hopefully becomes clear and we can all start planning for hopefully a very successful summer and onwards. Yeah.
And Steve, as an accommodation provider and somebody who facilitates student visits, you've had quite an interesting year having to pivot and juggle things. So tell us about your experience.
Oh, well, I'll keep it brief. It's been painful, but no, I mean, we had no master plan to start with. You know, we went from full to almost empty in a week in March last year. And because of our apartments and the fact that they're 1, 2 and 3 bedroom apartments, there is another market. We actually gave 50 apartments free to the NHS for 2 months, and kindly the industry, both in America and here, bought care packs for those people as well. So that was important because, again, you know, we had these buildings and we also have rented a lot out. So we've rented 70% of our stock on long-term lets, 6 to 12 month lets. We've filled it in with whether it's engineers or builders, and even working actually with Dan and Student.com for the first time. And we've actually, with our newer buildings, which we ended up with 2 new buildings in June, which was interesting. We've actually had really great reviews and people really enjoy them, just long-term international students. And actually, you were talking before about the social scene, because ours are self-contained apartments, really lovely self-contained apartments, 400-500 meg broadband, big TVs and everything else. Actually, some people felt it was better for them to be in that because they weren't going to be able to do a lot of the social things anyway. We've had to pivot our educational business, and so we now do a virtual internship program. I believe you're working, George, with one of the students. So that was really out of the request from a lot of the universities we work with, that there were kids who really wanted to have international experience, were desperate to come abroad if they could, and if they couldn't, wanted to have an element of experience. And I think that bodes very well for the UK and for Europe, because I know a lot of countries in Europe are doing virtual programs. But also shows that there is that demand. One of our students last summer, and we from April to May created a virtual program. When she had a photo of her final day at work, her mug said, "I'd rather be in London." And, you know, hopefully a lot of these virtual programs will actually help drive demand further in the future, because they're learning culture before they arrive. I do, however, think the virtual programming will be here to stay and may give accessibility to those who aren't actually able to afford to come abroad.
With a lot of studies being online at the moment, do you think it would be possible for a student to be traveling, backpacking around the world while doing their studies? Could you do the visits that you would traditionally have done in a gap year? Could you do that and study at the same time, or do you think that the colleges will move back to in-person stuff full time?
Well, I mean, Dan will know better than me, but I think half of, if not more, I did a lecture yesterday, so I said less than half of people who go there it's about the experience. It's about meeting people on campus. It's that whole uni experience, which is part learning. It's part learning about yourself, and you do learn a lot traveling. And I traveled before uni and after uni, and yeah, I mean, I got into, you know, accommodation through family, but also I worked in a backpackers hostel in Sydney. But also I've got lifelong friends from university, which you're spending 3 years together. It's very different. So it depends what course, but actually I think that on-campus experience will not go away. But what I do think is education will change, and I think vocational degrees, and I don't mean just mechanics or hospitality like I did. I mean like artificial intelligence or very specific medical fields, virology, epidemiology, words we didn't really know about this time last year, will become more important, because I think students will want to invest that 3 or 4 years into a career rather than just an experience. But Dan will have more insight on that.
Yeah, do you want to pick up on that, Dan, a bit?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Steve, for the kind words. So, yeah, no, I think on campus education, the demand is there for it. You know, we have tens of thousands of customers who are based abroad, who should be in the UK, they should be in Australia, they should be in the US, and they're not really getting the same experience that they certainly thought they were paying for, and that they've also, you know, had demand for. The good news is most of these guys are on study abroad programs where they kind of have to travel within the next 9 to 12 months. Otherwise, they'll just, you know, they'll graduate from university, so that they'd miss their slot. So we still expect a lot of them to find a way to come. And we're seeing demand now come in for people who will come as soon as March or April, if they're able to have, you know, just 2 or 3 months experience in the UK or in the US or in Australia, simply because they want to have that abroad experience. Yeah, their CVs would have the box ticked of having studied in a US uni or a UK uni, but they don't want the box ticked. Actually, it's all about the experience for them as well. That being said, you know, we've definitely proven you can study remotely, just like we can all work remotely, and it's going to change that side of it. I can see a world where, you know, why do you need to have 150 people in a room for a lecture? It's probably more engaging actually to have it on a screen in front of you. So I think that could be a thing, but the seminars, the group workshops, the practical side of things for certain courses, I think they'll have to be on campus, and we'll come back strong.
Talking of experiential, the experiential element, what do people think about the quote from Will Hatton earlier, where he thinks the pandemic might be a catalyst for people to change their travel habits, and they won't be in a rush to do Southeast Asia or do Europe and spend 2 or 3 days each place and not really immerse themselves. Do you think attitudes might change? Sem, what do you think about that? You've got properties in various European capitals. You must see the people who are on a whistle-stop tour.
I guess the most travelers we get are people who are looking for an experience, right? So that's never going to change, I think. Even more so, I think specifically the experience is something that people will then want to travel more for. I also realize that as of now, mostly if you do physical traveling, it's within your country. And now when you go less, maybe for the normal daily things, then people might more easily take a trip abroad for certain things. Like if it's a little bit longer term, like internships or like taking a class or a training or these kind of things, they can much easier be in other countries. So I'm expecting actually that it will create more flexibility and a higher reach of people that travel.
Vicki, what do you think about traveling attitudes, and are you seeing people wanting to travel more with a purpose? So some of these initiatives to give back to communities and this kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I think not only is that a characteristic of this kind of generation Z, really considering their impact, thinking about what they're giving back to communities. I think this pandemic has really impacted young people disproportionately. They've had their studies interrupted. They've had, it's harder for them to maybe get onto the job market. They're probably more impacted by redundancies, just the levels that they're at. So they need to find purpose, and they need to find ways to, progress their self-development. So I think we're absolutely seeing an increase in people looking outside the box of the normal ways of progressing their careers, whether that's working overseas, doing an internship, studying abroad, learning a new skill, volunteering. I absolutely think that the extended trips and traveling with purpose is going to be an even bigger trend. I saw a survey that was released just this month by Kentucky that said that 25% of the 18 to 35-year-olds that they surveyed were considering a gap year or sabbatical. And that's actually a huge number of people just to take off for a few months at a time. So yeah, I think there's going to be a really big increase in longer trips, and they have so many other benefits, sustainability and being a little bit more environmentally friendly. Like if you're going to travel long haul, that's got a big flight attached to it. But go there for a couple of months, travel overland, travel slowly, take a breath. And I think that sense of getting under the skin of a culture, getting to understand the local people, the communities, really appeals to Generation Z's like quest for authenticity and really getting to the truth of the matter.
Mm-hmm. Steve, one of the questions I was going to ask was, is the gap year still a thing, or will the gap year still be a thing? Judging from that, it clearly is. Does that resonate with your experience?
Yeah, I think the experience economy, as people were talking about pre-COVID, was always important. Even if you look at the trends of food boxes, it's something that rather than just getting a delivery, you're cooking and you've got a video to go with it, and people don't want to just have a bland world, because ultimately, if you just sit at a screen and you watch a delivery, it is quite bland. I mean, I do it quite a lot, but I also like to cook. I think that, and obviously one of BUNAC's main roles is this working abroad option, and I think people will do that, and they will do it for as long as they can. I think the academic internship is normally the precursor to a longer term BUNAC year abroad, or like I did when I went to Australia. And I think it will say, it may not be a gap year, it may be gap years. If you look at the trends around co-living, a lot of it is based on the flexibility of the lease as opposed to the physical product, in my belief, because I think product's lovely, but it's that flexibility when you've got that monthly running contract, which is quite helpful if you're not sure exactly what you want to do. Whereas most people get into a lease, it's 6 to 12 months, and you need to be really sure you want to be there. I did, when I did my gap year, I did 3 months through Southeast Asia. I flew into into Hanoi, and I left out Singapore 3 months later. I had no plans of anything in between. I think the modern generation want to plan a little bit more, but I did it all by coach, local bus and a couple of mopeds, and it was great. You know, you saw a lot, you felt a lot, and I still, you know, have massively fond memories and learned so much from it. And I think that will become more important. We've got to remember, this is probably the first time in any of our generations that we've actually been restricted on travel. 9/11, you could travel. You know, the Gulf Wars, you could still travel. Even through when I was growing up, you know, in the 80s, the IRA, yeah, it restricted some movement, but it didn't actually restrict. I mean, the world stopped turning for a couple of months, and you know, I've been all around the world now, and it's amazing. But being restricted from it often makes you want to want it more, and I think that restriction will allow that. And I just think if they're not sure that there's a career at home now, people are going to travel and want to explore, because it's human nature.
Yeah. You mentioned that young people these days might want to plan a bit more than they did before. So how is that going to affect the distribution landscape? I mean, you can access so much online now that people can curate their own trips without using intermediaries if they really want to go to the hassle of doing all that. So what do intermediaries such as travel companies, tour operators, agents and stuff, what do they have to do to remain relevant and compelling? Vicki, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, I think the biggest aspect for any travel agency or intermediary is you have to add value at the moment. There has to be something that you're bringing to the table. And I guess for a lot of travel agencies, it's you know, it's financial protection, or it's knowledge. You know, for the first time, we're seeing our demographic who previously were like, I just want to book online. I don't want to interact with anybody. I just don't want to talk to anybody. They all want to talk to us all at the same time, because they want that human contact and the reassurance of, what is the travel restrictions if I go to the US this summer? How do I get into Japan? What's the work visa process for Canada right now? There's so many questions. If you can answer those questions, if you're transparent, if you know, there's it's said a lot of Gen Z that they have a very, very strong bullshit radar, right? So you've got to know your stuff, you've got to be factual, you've got to be really transparent. But I do think that there is a place for that kind of trusted expertise, because travel is a confusing landscape at the moment for anyone. And so different to before COVID, I think young people are looking for that extra reassurance.
Yeah, like you say, it's never been such a complicated issue at the moment. So yeah, I'm sure it's keeping the likes of you guys on your toes. We alluded to the kind of social aspect earlier. So in terms of accommodation providers, how does that affect what they have to do? You know, in terms of sustainability, efficient buildings, food miles, that kind of stuff. Steve, do you want to kick off with that one?
I mean, for us, it's slightly easier. Dan's got better knowledge of PBSAs, but for us, you know, we developed a student cookbook through the last 12 months, which has gone down very well with the group of students we've had thus far. But ours is all self-catering. We do get asked, what we are doing now is we're planting a tree for every student that arrives. We actually have the same for the residents, and also everyone doing a virtual internship. And, you know, it's probably meant more to the students than it has to some of the universities, but actually it's important. But I think sustainability, we actually don't get asked any questions about the sustainability at all by anyone. It's actually more in corporate housing, where there's corporate and social responsibility requirements from big blue chip tech brands that want to know that where they are. And we got all the information, but I've actually personally never had a student ask for that. So I don't know, Dan, if you get that, but I know it's a lot of people say that they're very focused on sustainability, but I don't know if it's a subconscious thing rather than a conscious actually asking for it.
Yeah.
Do you want to pick up on that, Dan? Because I think the PBSA sector is quite advanced in that respect, mainly because the institutional investors behind a lot of it are, you know, they insist on high levels of sustainability.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's also a symptom of the fact that, you know, most PBSA is new in terms of, you know, versus historical hotels or apartments and so on. So, you know, by virtue of that, it's just built in a slightly more sustainable way. But I will echo Steve that I don't think it's as big a thing as people suggest at times. Students aren't asking us, you know, how much carbon emission comes from the building and so on. I can't remember the name of it. I was desperately looking for it whilst we spoke. But there's a PBSA down in Brighton that I think is the first ever PBSA to be essentially zero net neutral, which is cool. But again, I haven't seen huge demand go to that building by virtue of that. But it is, you know, a marketing positioning, and it's quite cool on a personal level. But I think students really make their own choices with, you know, you know, what they purchase, how they handle things, and what they do within that building, and, you know, perhaps kind of a realistic about the actual emissions that come from buildings. Yeah,
interesting that institutional investors are more concerned about sustainability than Gen Z. That's not what I was expecting. Sem, how about your guests? Are they engaged with the sustainability agenda?
Yeah, they are actually. But I must say that institutional investors, of course, they have also more pressure from like municipalities. And I think developing any real estate nowadays, you know, becomes much easier in terms of licensing and all these things. If you are, you know, helping the government also getting their goals met. But we are getting requests actually. I find that a lot of travelers that come to our place, they are very aware of that, and we also communicate that. I think in the basis our concept already was built for that. It's kind of a part of the sharing economy. I think a big difference you already make if you just share your resources, space, and other things together. And I think that's also something that the new generation, you know, does much more, less ownership, also that. But we're also working on a plan now to kind of create a philosophy of traveling, to teach our travelers also like how they can be more aware of the city, because I think a sustainable challenge is just also over tourism in cities, and you know, especially in Amsterdam, it's a very big thing right now. They're trying to fight somehow, and what they're doing right now is just putting up the taxes for lower priced accommodation. So they really kind of think that the solution is there to have budget traveling, you know, removed, which is not really a good sustainable solution, I think. So yeah, I think we can teach maybe, or get travelers on board, or create awareness to what it means to the city when they're there. So
yeah, thanks, Sem. We had a question in the chat from Chantal asking what is PBSA, which I see a couple of people have answered is purpose-built student accommodation. So apologies for assuming that everybody understands the acronyms. If anybody else has got questions, please do submit them in the chat, and we'll get around to them. One of the things that the pandemic has done is, in the broader hospitality market, is to make self-contained units, apartments, extended stay hotels, much more attractive, especially in the short term. And those asset classes have seen really good performance compared with the general market, and a lot more attention from the investment community. How does that leave hospitality venues such as hostels that have a big element on communal areas, on dormitories, and to some extent co-living? Is that going to come back as strong as it was before, or are people going to continue to want to have more self-contained units? Dan, do you want to pick up on that one first?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, hostels, I think, probably have one of the biggest challenges in our youth travel industry that there is. And the model of 10 people in a room is just not going to happen for some time. If there's a COVID case in that room, that would mean all 10 of them have to isolate. It's not going to happen. So now they're having to pivot to go into private rooms, and then prices come up, and then those prices put them in competition with budget and kind of low cost hotels. So then you have the quality of a hostel shared room versus a budget hotel and the competition there. And obviously hostels make a lot of money on F&B as well. And when you can't run your bars and have the thriving hubs that are hostels and super fun where you want to be, they have less appeal as well for young people. So I think the challenge there is huge for that segment, but it also impacts low cost budget hotels as well, because they're kind of all tripping over each other into the same segment. And then going into kind of a student accommodation space, really, where people are looking for trying to lock in those 1 month stays and these sorts of things, because they're seen as kind of safer revenue opportunities and so on. So it's kind of the merging of almost 3 different types of accommodation to serve the same customer now.
Steve, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of hostels, having stayed in. I've lived in a few and ran them, and I think a lot of us on here have stayed in them and love them, and certainly frequented a few of the bars there. I think there is a general fear of catching it, even though the youth market is less susceptible to it. They just don't want to get it, ideally. And I think everyone's been at home, and I'm fortunate to have more space than others. But I think space has become really important, and efficient space. It doesn't have to be big, but efficient space is going to be really, really important for people staying either for a night or longer. I mean, we've seen in our corporate brand, the Residents, and Pierce, and I think you've been over to a couple of them, George. They're very spacious, they're very luxurious, and yeah, we've had a really steady demand. We've run at over 90% occupancy, which has been amazing. A lot of luck, a lot of hard work to get people in. But a lot of it, people are asking what the square footage is. Can I fit 2 or 3 desks in the lounge if it's a 2 or 3 bedroom apartment, etc. So I think hostels have already done some really innovative things. I know there's some in Amsterdam who have converted half the building into student housing, using the shared cooking facilities as shared cooking facilities. It's just going to take time. And I think the big challenge for hostels, and even with co-living, the old model pre-COVID was probably smaller spaces. Now probably the demand is in bigger spaces and more self-contained, rather than sharing too many of the spaces because of fear of contamination. And also from a management perspective, it's very difficult to contain. But I do think the challenge will be is that the different countries, and what the UK Transport Minister said today, which was very waffly and concerning, was that if we're only going to open the borders to other countries that have high vaccination rates and low mutation rates, it means you're not just going to reopen, you're going to reopen in a very haphazard, bumpy way. And I think that's a really challenging thing for youth travel. The demand will be there, and I think the private rooms will be popular first, and then it will, as things progress, it will open up. Obviously for hostels, school groups are quite a big business, particularly out of Germany, but France and even the UK, around the UK. So I think once that gets moving, and there was hope that would start in September, then that will give a lot of the base business for those more heavier dormed hostels to have the base business in to then yield from.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that younger travellers are less worried about the virus, but they still don't want to catch it. Chantal is asking from South Africa, do you think Gen Z will avoid countries with new variants? Do you think they'll choose where to travel based on, infection levels or variations?
It depends if they watch the news. Unfortunately, a lot of the people I work with, a lot of them have just switched it off because, ultimately most mainstream media is so depressing now that it makes you anxious just watching it. And I don't really know. We had students arrive on the 7th of January into London. Yeah, they had a choice up to 24 hours beforehand whether they would come or not. We have another group arriving hopefully at the end of next week, there was 14 students on the group as of 2 weeks ago, and there's now 17 and maybe 18. So that's all I can say. Way lower than normal, but people still want to travel, even though if you watch CNN, it makes us look like a war zone. But that's that. But it's such a small sample size. But I do know that it's more the lockdowns and the restrictions of being able to live in the country, which we have in London and the UK at the moment, that is more of a distraction necessarily than the virus, I believe.
Yeah, yeah. Somebody has asked in the chat if the Contiki research that Vicki alluded to is available, and she's kindly posted it in the chat there. So if anyone wants to have a look at that, then please do. Let's talk about investment in the sector. Dan, obviously in the PBSA sector is it's hot stuff at the moment for the investment community. We've seen just in the last week or two, I think we've seen Bearings get involved, forward funding projects. We've seen the Ascot Residence Trust invest in PBSA properties in the US, which is a new move for them. So it's pretty mature there, but are you seeing more or less investment appetite in the sector as a result of the pandemic?
Yeah, I think probably about the same would be what I've seen. There's been a kind of pause on a lot of it because a lot of construction projects were just kind of pushed back 6 months or even like 3 months, which means they miss a whole academic year of cycle. So therefore are not full. So then they don't open for another year. So then, you know, it slightly delays that. But then, you know, we saw IQ student accommodation sell in the largest real estate transaction in British history for 4.7 billion. So, you know, you can't say that it's dry by any stretch. Yeah, and I think that we're seeing the rise of global student accommodation as well now. So you have GSA, the student accommodation brand, who's just bought up $700 million worth of housing in the US to go with their UK and Australian and European portfolios and so on. So this is quite cool and quite an exciting thing. On a personal level, you know, student.com, we've raised about $90 million so far on our kind of journey to building our business, and it's gone incredibly well, and investment for us continues to be on the forefront, and certainly people are not shy to have those conversations. And then when you look into wider youth travel, you know, there's a huge gap now with STA no longer with us that I think will be filled by a student accommodation brand that will likely be acquired by a bigger brand in 7 to 10 years and kind of join one of the big groups like we did with Student Universe into Flight Centre. So I think it's rife for investment. We have September coming, and that should mean, hopefully, fingers crossed, back to full occupancy levels. And when you have a asset class with 97, 98% occupancy for a year in September, I think everybody would feel very good and confident with that.
Thanks, Dan. Vicki, what's your take on the investment landscape for youth travel in general?
I think as we've talked about the resilience of the youth traveller, I think investors are seeing the longer term opportunity. And I saw a couple of comments pop up about, you know, thinking long term for hostels, and is this, you know, are we really going to see broad scale changes long term? And I think in the short term, everyone's having to pivot and make adjustments to their businesses. But young people are resilient and they have very short memories. So I do think they're going to bounce back. And I think investors that have the deep enough pockets to ride the waves, spend this time innovating their products, ensuring that their brands are relevant for dealing with this post-COVID world, they're seeing the long-term opportunity for sure. And I think, you know, as Dan said, I think there's going to be a lot of movement. It's kind of like the whole youth travel industry has been thrown up in the air, and it really is all, the entire market space is up for grabs, which feels unsettling, but it also drives really positive change. So everyone starts innovating, and the way to grab this market's attention is to have really strong values and to have great transparency and to, you know, have a really ethical approach to business. So that surely can only, you know, move us forward in a positive direction. So yeah, as a business that just secured new investment, I'm obviously pretty positive about the situation, but that's absolutely what, you know, we were very transparent during that process. You know, our number of customers actually traveling at that exact point in time were minimal, but our long-term prospects were good, and it's a, you know, it's a solid little business with a really strong heritage. So yeah, I think youth travel, compared to almost all other segments of the travel industry, offers really good opportunities. And yeah, I'm actually just really excited to see what happens over the next 1 to 3 years, for sure.
Thanks, Vicki. Steve, with regards to the accommodation element specifically, we have seen 1 or 2 major deals. The generator deal, which we mentioned earlier. I think Meininger was nearly sold last year, but that didn't happen. Are there any big deals that you can see in that space just around the corner?
I mean, I think in accommodation, but I think as the guys have said, I think there will be consolidation. I know in the study abroad space, there's certainly things that are being looked at the moment. I think everyone prepares for 3 or 6 months with no revenue, but not a year. And I think that's the tough part. So out of every crisis, someone does well out of it. And I think there will be some investors looking at the long-term prospects. And as Murray said on the chat, hostels are really important for the ecosystem of cities' tourism products. You know, if you don't have the school groups and the young people, you don't have a long tail tourism product. So I think there will be investors interested in looking at that. And I think where Dan mentioned earlier on was that the budget and 2-star hotel market and it all molding together, whether those will become relevant, I think is probably more than the hostel space. And I think because the hostel has a more defined market, I think investors will potentially look at how they can maybe repurpose some of the sort of budgety 2-star, you know, unprofessional hotels in big cities in Europe and turn them into an asset that yields more, has more flexibility, and can deliver better long-term returns, which hostels have proved in the past. And I think just now it's just really difficult. But I think if you look at the city, look at London, you know, hostels found it difficult to start again in London, but so did all the budget hotels. And you know, a lot of well-known brands were spending a lot of money to try and generate traffic. But the reality is people weren't coming to the cities at this moment in time.
The value of a brand is an interesting one in the hostel segment. I mean, there aren't that many recognizable international hostel brands, certainly. Do you think a brand is as important in this space, or is it more about location and price?
I think it's a combination. If you're a single unit, and Sam will be able to tell you more because he's in multiple cities, but you know, if you're in multiple cities, if you're on that backpacker trail, your brand is really important because then it'll be the first place that they choose when they go to those cities. If you're a one-off hostel in Rome, then actually the brand's important because people will share it on Instagram and so forth, but it's not the be-all and end-all. And from an investment perspective, I guess most of the investment in hostels in the past has been more about the property and the asset than it has been about the brand. And I think travel generally is, depending on the market, is value as opposed to price, but location will be everything, depending on how long someone is staying there. And I can see it from, you know, when you load your student accommodation on student.com, it's your distance from the different campuses, walking, cycling, etc. So location is obviously going to be important, but I think that's a very interesting thing. And I don't think it's just for youth. I actually think even the biggest hotel brands in the world, how important is their brand now? Because even with the biggest brand in the world, you can't make people fly if you're not allowed to.
Yeah,
Sam will know more from his perspective.
Well, yeah, let's move on to you, Sam. How important is your brand when it comes to growing your portfolio, when you're talking to investors or potential properties, and to your guest as well? What role does the brand play?
I think especially for investors right now, it's quite important. You also realize that there's this merge happening, like a lot of like real estate investors and kind of operator investors, they're trying to find each other somehow, because these things are becoming more interdependent, and they're not separate units anymore. So we notice that a lot. That's a strength also of our brand. I think actually the brand comes more from the experience to deliver. You deliver, right? So you have a brand, like from the outside, you can have a brand that's recognizable. But if from the inside you have a hotel that always has certain standards, then people just come back, not necessarily because of the flag, but more because, well, it's always the certain standard. And we're trying to also combine that, because I feel that mostly they want kind of an experience. So if you go to a different city, you don't want to have like a copy of the hotel there. People want to have kind of a local experience, but they want to have certain standards. So for example, our rooms are always the same, so people know what it's going to be like. But actually, as soon as you step outside, you're kind of in a local environment. So then you combine a little bit those two desires.
Okay, well, let's move on to talk about some exciting new brands in the space that you guys know about, but I don't yet. So I'd like to ask you all maybe a couple of companies to look out for. They can be accommodation, they could be a new platform, anything you like. Who should we be looking out for in the next year or so? Do you want to start with that one, Sem?
Well, I guess the first thing that comes to mind with me is Zoku, because we've been talking to them a lot. It's not really in the youth travel, so I'm not sure that's a good example in this case. But I think that what we're noticing is that, well, we've developed our room, which is a hub, which is like a very tiny little room, but with shared bathrooms. And we're noticing around us also other concepts filling up this space. And even though it's kind of scattered still, I do think there are a lot of interesting brands that are trying to offer this package.
Okay, Vicki, how about you?
I was racking my brains with this one because there hasn't been a lot of new entrants to our market in the last year, with this pretty challenging market to enter right now. But what I am seeing is a lot of innovation from the existing brands to take the space of like you say, companies like STA Travel falling by the wayside, and you know, thinking about someone like Intrepid that's really taking that environmental sustainability piece to the next level. They've got scientific targets in place that they're working towards. G Adventures have really worked hard on the transparency of their pricing, so really identifying how much of your pounds that you're paying, or dollars, or whatever currency, goes to the local communities. So I'm definitely not as looped in with what's happening in the accommodation space as the other speakers, but a lot of really positive innovation coming about from all of the existing brands, and I'm sure there will be new entrants to the market in our space very, very soon. But it's, you know, it's tough. There's not a lot of government support for new companies right now, so I know that pretty much all other businesses are taking advantage of government assistance during this period. But for new entrants, that would be challenging. So I'm afraid I didn't come up with any, but yeah, definitely the current existing companies, there's a lot of great innovation going on.
I'm sure Steve has got a couple up his sleeve.
Of course.
I know, Ruby Hotels is really interesting. I had one of my colleagues stay at the one in London, and I think that's quite fun. And I think that's what I didn't really have the money to invest in the product, but when I was doing EMEA hotels, it was that really funky sort of shabby chic style property, and they've got a new building, I don't believe, in Notting Hill. So that's pretty interesting. I also think the expansion of Moxie hotels, you know, and how that's going with Marriott. I stayed in one in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and it was just amazing. Like DJ behind the reception desk, and it was just so much fun. More fun after Chattanooga whiskey, but that's another story. So that I think will be, and I also think the Airbnb style platforms, and there's some more niche ones coming out, is if people are going to stay longer, is how they access potentially more apartment style accommodation. There was a cool company called Plum Guide, still around, but obviously a lot of their stuff slowed down a bit. we're starting to get inquiries from them again, where it's very much curated, matching tenant and occupant on a service let for 2 or 3 months. So I think that could be a really interesting trend. And actually, where hostels have maybe reimagined some of their rooms to longer stay accommodation, that might be an option for people looking through those platforms like Airbnb for more, more longer stay accommodation. So I think that will be quite interesting over the next sort of 6 to 9 months.
Yeah, Ruby Hotels is an interesting one actually, because they're also incorporating co-working space in quite a few of their hotels as well.
Yeah, I think so that's okay. There you go. I tried.
Dan, finally, what have you got on the radar?
Yeah, I think on the student accommodation standpoint, that there's lots of new challenging brands coming in, people who are not reliant on 42-week or 44-week or 51-week tenancies and coming in and kind of breaking the model, but actually fulfilling students' needs. So Steve's company is a great example of one that's great. Anglo, Londonist, people like this who are not sat on their laurels with their assets and are just adjusting to run it more like a P&L-led business whilst also kind of maintaining the asset value. And then in the wider student space, I think probably one of my favorite websites now is a website called Student Crowd. It's basically a reviews-led student platform kind of around the university experience. And that's kind of challenging people like Times Higher Education and these guys who historically would have been the authority on what's a good university and what's not a good university. Well, actually now it's kind of peer-to-peer, it's word of mouth led, it's what people want to, it's people's opinions and what they do. And they also obviously have a fantastic student accommodation section that we power. So all together, I think that's a really cool website to shake it up and to also fit what's in demand from youth.
Great, thanks Dan, and thanks everybody. We're coming to the end of the hour now, unfortunately. Thanks to everyone who submitted questions too, and I'm sure we could carry on if we had the time because it's a big subject, but the main thing I've taken from this is that the next few months are going to continue to be tough, but the demand is really out there, and once it's allowed to come back, it's going to come back with a bang. So hopefully everybody can hang in there. Just want to run you through a couple of quick slides before we finish. We are launching an intense week of webinars called the Urban Living Light Series, which is taking place in the first week of March. Originally, these were going to be live events with an online element. Sadly, that isn't possible, but the content of these is going to be fantastic. Loads of different hospitality and real estate asset classes covered and some great speakers. So do check those out. I think the link to find more information about those will be in the chat shortly. Yeah, there you go. The next Urban Living webinar is in 2 weeks' time, and we'll be looking at the rise of extended stay and apart hotels. That's on February the 24th, and again, the link for that is in the chat. This is one of the Urban Living series in the run-up to the Urban Living Festival, which, as I said earlier, is taking place in London in July, and we can't wait to see loads of people face-to-face and share a cold ale or two with you. They are some of our fantastic sponsors and media partners. If you'd like to find out more about any of our events, please contact my colleague Katie, whose details are in the chat. And please do give us a follow on social. There are all the accounts there. And so that all there is to do is to thank Res Harmonics, our sponsor, and thank you to Sem, to Vicki, to Steve, and to Dan, and hopefully see you on another webinar soon. Thanks very much. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.